Hello, BillWhittle.com members and non-members alike. I'm Steve Green with Bill Whittle and Scott Ott, and this is what used to be members-only content, but apparently our members got tired of not only having to pay this stuff, but being the only ones who had to watch it, and so they voted and
to share the burden.
Yes, they've opened this previously members-only content to everyone, and for that, really, they owe you a heartfelt apology and maybe $5. Anyway, this is my lightning round. When my turn comes around to do the bonus segment, instead of digging deep into one story, I select headlines seemingly at random, but actually with malice in my heart, and surprise Bill and Scott with stories that they have no idea what they'll be talking about. So without further ado, we're going to start with Bill this week. Oh, I like this story. Brooks Brothers says it will manufacture 150,000 masks per day. America's oldest retailer is one of the few brands that make clothing in the United States, which gives them this ability. It's kind of nice to make stuff here every now and then, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. The masks start at $450, and if you buy two, you get a third mask at half price.
I picked up a dozen Corona cravats just the other day.
It's the pinstripe. I don't like the bold pinstripes on my mask. I'm more of a thin pinstripe kind of guy, but I think that's kind of elegant. And forget about the double-breasted masks. Those things are just absurd. No, with all kidding aside, it's a wonderful thing, and we're seeing it everywhere. Yeah. Needless to say, the MyPillow guy got lambasted by our social betters because he had the audacity to say maybe this would be a good time to get together with your family, maybe pray, thank the president for making these things move so quickly. There's a famous tweet out there that said the guy who from MyPillow is now talking about the pandemic. You can't make this stuff up. Like, ha ha ha! Why haven't we activated the Federal Department of Masks? What so many people don't seem to understand, really will never understand, is that the government doesn't make anything. I remember watching the MSC promos, I guess with Rachel Maddow out at Hoover Dam a couple of years ago, saying, this idea that everything's done by the private sector. Well, the Hoover Dam was made by the government, and it was done in this many years, and so on and so forth. It was done before Franklin Roosevelt. That's why it got finished. But put that aside. The Congress didn't go out and build the dam, and neither did the people who were administrating the project. They hired private contractors to go out and build the dam, and that's how the dam got built. So when you hear things like Brooks Brothers, when you find out companies like Ford say, yeah, we got fans that cool the seats. You want to talk about a first world luxury? We have our seats pre-cooled in our automobiles with little fans that apparently can be repurposed into ventilators. When you see all of this activity on the part of entrepreneurs who are bringing fresh ideas or conversions, or hey, we turn a scuba tank into a respirator with this. It costs $11. You can take it, get the stuff off of the hardware shelf. This is the real genius of it. And I do remember quite clearly, Steve, that the moment I was first impressed with Donald Trump's handling of this was several weeks ago now, when he brought out, basically said, you'll be able to do your testing at Walmart or Target or some other place that has a parking lot capable of parking 20,000 cars and does hundreds of thousands of people a day. You're not going to have to go to the DMV, and wait in line for your test. We're going to have a chance to really get some data out of this, and I think that the free market's going to come through this with a tremendous record. I know that the powers that be will do everything to make sure that story doesn't get out, but God bless you, Brooks Brothers, and I'm sure they're going to be stylish and elegant.
Bill, you reminded me of one of the favorite stories from the early days of World War II. We weren't involved yet. We were starting to gear up for war as things got ugly in Europe and in the Pacific as well. And FDR wanted 50,000 airplanes in this first year of gearing up for the war. And I don't think there were 50,000 planes on the entire planet. And he wanted U.S. industry to come up with 50,000 planes in 12 months. But, big business, the malefactors of great wealth, as he called them, he didn't want them to make any money at it. And one of his advisors, I can't remember who it was, said, sir, if you let them make a profit, they will give you your 50,000 planes. And sure enough, 50,000 planes the first year. Just incredible what American business can do when we set our minds to it, and individuals too, of course. All right, Scott, to you. CBS blames editing mistake for Italian hospital footage. This horrible, ugly, awful hospital footage in report on New York City hospital conditions. Wouldn't it be nice if just every now and then they'd make a mistake that made America look better instead of worse? Just once.
Are you saying they showed footage of Little Italy hospital conditions?
No, Italy, the north of Italy, where everything's
Not the
been going to
neighborhood
hell
in New
for
York that they
6
used
weeks
to
now.
call.
No.
You know, it is hard to keep track of all of those miles and miles of film canisters. And so I'm sure cutting that together with a razor blade and tape can be tricky. What do you say? I mean, people make mistakes, so I'm not going to jump down their throats. I don't know the particulars behind the situation. On the other hand, there's a lot of ways to verify that what you're doing is the right thing. And when your entire organization exists to be able to promulgate verifiable facts, and when a great part of your effort has been spent for the last several years of trying to convince the world that you've got a president of the United States who does nothing but lie, you would think you'd be a lot more careful about the information that you put out there and the pictures that go with it. They can do better. When in my little fantasy world, back when I was a journalism student, I really thought that newsrooms would be filled with passionate people who cared for nothing but the truth and would be actively pursuing it. I remember in our journalism 101 class, if you misspelled somebody's name, you would fail for that assignment. So you write a news story, no matter how good it is, if you misspelled somebody's name, it was a failure because the facts mattered, people mattered, and it would be good to get back to a little bit more of that journalism 101 stuff.
Steve, would you mind if I just add something to this?
Please.
Only because I spent 20 years as one of those editors, including cutting film with a razor blade and splicing it together with glue. I actually did that. But I was a TV editor for 15, 20 years. I know the situation very well. What happens in a situation like that is you've got a news producer, and he wants to tell a story. And the story he wanted to tell was how horrible things are in New York. And they didn't have the footage. Now, they didn't have the footage. So they use the Italian footage. No, it's not an accident. It's not like there's a bin that floats. It's like, oh, no, they knew what it was. They used it because they needed the footage to tell the story that they wanted to tell, and they couldn't get it. And it makes me wonder if the reason they couldn't get it was because at the time anyway, it didn't exist. You would think that CBS News would be able to send somebody into a hospital in New York City and get some footage of crowded conditions. But the fact that they had to go to the footage in Italy tells me that they simply didn't have the footage that they needed in order to tell the story that they wanted to tell.
By the way, Steve, I saw a CNN report the other day. They are standing outside the hospitals. Apparently, they're not in the hospitals to protect themselves and others. But there was this reporter standing on a corner across an intersection from a hospital. And she just got done saying that the streets are absolutely empty. And anybody that you do run into, every single person is wearing a surgical mask. On cue, a guy walks about 20 feet behind her, striding right across the middle of the intersection, barefaced. And then in the distance, you saw two more guys appear on street corners, neither of which were wearing any kind of protective gear. It was awesome.
Who are you going to believe? The press or your own lion eyes? Question for the ages. All right, Bill, this one pisses me off. Sorry. The Air Force's troubled Boeing KC-46 tankers leak fuel excessively. The announcement comes weeks after the Air Force said it would not use the tanker aircraft, for aerial refueling missions except in a major emergency. They're trying to figure out how to convert these tankers temporarily into airlift instead. You know, we've been refueling jets since the late 40s. Boeing built the first tanker for the U.S. Air Force at the time. They've been building them ever since. What the hell is going wrong at that company these days?
Was it a T-46, did you say?
The KC-46. The Pegasus tanker. Yeah, it's built on the Boeing 767 platform.
That's what I thought. I just wanted to check.
Which has been flying for 40 years almost.
Yeah.
None of this is new.
No, I just wanted to confirm that it was the 767 conversion. So the first There were aerial refueling tankers back in the era of propeller-driven airplanes, and the first aerial tankers were propeller-driven airplanes, but rapidly became clear that these were not flying fast enough to keep the jets fueled in the beginning of the Cold War. So the first thing they did was they took a well-established airframe, which was the Boeing 707, and turned it into the KC-135, which is still the preeminent refueling aircraft 60 years after it first flew, something like that. They tried to make the KC-10 out of the out of the McDonnell Douglas DC-10. That apparently met with some success. But converting a 767 is exactly what you want to do. This seems like good common sense. Why design an airplane from scratch when basically all you're doing is you're taking out the passenger seats and putting in fuel tanks? It's a no-brainer. The aircraft has a long history, a reliable history. Maintenance is all taken care of, parts, crews, everything. People who know how to fly it, everything's in place. For them to not be able to put an internal tank inside an airplane that is not able to hold fuel is beyond my understanding. And we talked about this a little bit earlier on Bill Whittle Now Show we shot with Scott just a little while ago. The problem is that failures in bureaucracies don't result in punishment. People don't get fired. Contractors don't get fired. Fines are not. It's just like this tanker that we bought. The only problem with it is that it doesn't hold fuel. Is that the only problem we have with our new tanker? Is that it can't hold any fuel? Is that the squawk on the sheet that we need to pay attention to?
Whiners.
Look, I know a lot of people in aerospace, and I know some of the best I know the best aircraft designer in the world. I know him well. Airplanes are complicated things, but this is not one of those cases. The complicated part was getting the 767 up, running, and operational in the first place.
And that was in 1981 when it first flew. 81.
Precisely. I cannot understand this, but honestly, when I hear things like this, Steve, it's like, it's about time that we started making sure that people in the government have consequences for their actions. And if you're the Air Force general in charge of this particular program and it's a big success, congratulations, you get another star. But if it turns out that the tanker that you're supervising is not able to hold a tank of gasoline or jet fuel, as the case may be, then you need to be cashiered. The people who work under you need to be cashiered, and there needs to be consequences for this so that the next time somebody gets put in charge of a program like this, they decide that they're going to take it seriously.
You know, just one of the biggest mistakes we made during the big riff of the 90s wasn't just eliminating too many Air Force wings. It wasn't just reducing the size of the military too much overall. It was allowing far too much consolidation inside the defense industry. Because if Boeing can't produce a tanker, we got nobody else to go to in this country. It's just sad. I mean, Lockheed Martin, the company my wife works for, it's a great company. She's in a great program. But Lockheed Martin builds the little crappy ship that has absolutely no mission because Lockheed bought a shipbuilder and doesn't know what to do with it. So that's the situation we're in now. All right, Scott, to you. More than twice as many voters are enthusiastic about voting for Trump compared to Biden. What's your gut telling you going into November? And do you think Biden's even going to make it to the convention, or if it's a virtual convention?
Well, Steve, apparently you are not aware of the fact, as on the front of Joe Biden's health and viability as a candidate, that he started a podcast this week.
I wrote about this yesterday for PJ Media.
Do you realize what it takes to start a podcast? The kind of vim and vigor and just virility on the part of the individual.
Not to say moxie.
No, lots of moxie. I don't know if he's going to make it. And if you listen to the people on the right, it sounds like he's already completely lost his mind and is about to shuffle off this mortal coil. If you listen to the people on the left, he's the kind of stable, mature executive that we need in a time like this. I literally don't see how anybody that the Democratic Party nominates beats President Trump at this point. There are a lot of people who've watched his show for a long time who are, upset with me because I tend to be somewhat cautious and even lukewarm about some things regarding the 45th President of the United States. But that said, he has blazed a path to reelection unlike anything I've ever seen before, and it would take much more than what's happened so far to even begin to threaten that. I mean, when you're seeing news stories that say that Joe Biden enjoys a 25% margin in this new poll, and you're like, holy cow, really? He's beating President Trump by 25%? And then you read it and it's like, among independents in particular counties in this state. It's like they found a pocket of enthusiasm for Joe Biden. Sadly, the things that enthuse the rank and file Democrats are not the things that get you nominated in the Democratic Party. So the kind of people who show up for primaries have one agenda. The kind of people who vote in a general election and who can carry that general election have a completely different agenda. And none of those people are excited about Joe Biden. They're literally sitting there going, we just got to get somebody in there who can win. And the more you focus on trying to get somebody who can win, the less likely you are to find somebody who can win.
And as Hillary Clinton pointed out accurately, I might add, she carried the nation's hairdressers by a significant margin. She was quite proud of that in the days after her stunning loss.
How many electoral college voters does the Pope have, I think is what Stalin asked. Sorry, a little historical trivia for you. I had this headline for me. We're at the last question now. The coronavirus is becoming a public relations disaster for China. And I just wanted to say, you think? But
what?
Becoming?
I don't even. And then I realized, I'm just gonna have to scratch that because I don't know where to start with that, and I don't know what more I could possibly add to that headline other than, you think? That pretty much covers it for our communist butchers of Beijing who figured out how to kill people all the way around the world without lifting their little fingers at home. That said, I want to talk about Joe Biden for a sec because I did write about this yesterday as podcast, and before that last week. He tried this sort of shadow presidency. I don't know. Did you guys talk about this on Bill Whittle Now at all?
No.
He tried this set of sort of shadow president fake press conferences to say, well, if I were president, this is what I'd be doing. And it's so much better than what Donald Trump would be doing, except is really simple stuff. It was, you've got Biden, you've got a podium, you got a couple of lights, you got somebody with a camera and all this. It took his staff, you would think, fairly vigorous, young, tech-savvy staff, 4 days to set this up. I could get this thing up and running in 15 minutes for about $300. That is, if you didn't have the lights or the tripod, with my smartphone and a decent microphone and all the rest, I could have you up and running in 10 minutes. And Bill and Scott and I had to figure out how to do this on our own in very little time 4 years ago, almost exactly 4 years ago.
When we didn't miss a show.
Yeah, when PJTV went dark. Well, we're going to start doing this ourselves next week. How do we do it? And we've been doing it for 4 years ever since. It took 4 days for them to set up a virtual press conference. And then, this is the real kicker, Biden flubbed it. He couldn't even run his own fake press conference. He's got a friendly questioner. He's got a teleprompter. And when the teleprompter stalls, he couldn't even figure out how to bluff his way through 30 seconds of prepared statements. It was one of the saddest things I've ever seen in my life. That didn't work, so they've kind of stopped doing that, I think. I haven't heard much about it. Monday of this week, as Scott said, they started a podcast. Well, I had to look this thing up. So I go to the podcast app that's built into my computer, and I pull it up. It had been up for hours, and there were 15 entire ratings left on this Joe Biden podcast. And the podcast consisted of Biden asking questions or taking questions from this so-called coronavirus expert, who is not a coronavirus expert, but was in fact a outside paid advisor to the Biden campaign. And he couldn't even make that podcast thing work. Can't get any listeners, can't get any ears. I don't know. I don't want to get cocky, but I think Scott is right. This thing looks like a blowout. I don't think Biden's on his deathbed or at death's door or anything like that, but it's clear that he's fading when a guy who's been talking for a living since the time that I was in preschool can't run a fake press conference or attract an audience for a big budget podcast just says volumes about the state of the National Democratic Party right now, and it's nothing good for you guys. Sorry for the bad news, but it's good for the country. And that is your lightning round for this week. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Steve Green with Bill Whittle and Scott Ott. We'll see you next time.